is homology, that because things are similar, therefore they must be related. And the more similar they are, the more closely related they are. Just on its face, if you step back 5 feet and look at that argument, anyone with half a brain and one eye would see how silly that is, because similarity could just as easily be argued for a common designer. I think we can analyze all the music ever written by Bach or Chopin or Mozart and find similarities in all of their scores that they wrote, or their musicals or whatever. And that does not prove that they are evolving. It proves that they are coming from the mind of the same individual. The same would be true of all of the books that an author writes, like Louis L'Amour, the famous Western writer here in America. His books, and I read probably 120 of them, I don't know what he wrote, but they have thousands and thousands of similarities. Proof it's coming from the same mind. So the big first thing I would get across is that, yes, I agree, there are similarities in all these animals, and similarities in the eye structure, and similarities in thousands of ways, but that has nothing to do with proving a common ancestor, and everything to do with indicating the same person designed them, and that would be God. So homologous structures are not evidence on their face for evolution. They're evidence for common designer. Now, you are correct. All of the textbooks use this argument that because these bones are similar in the animals, we have 2 bones in our wrist, the radius and the ulna. Hang on, let me write the time down here. The bat has 2 bones in his wrist, if you call it a wrist, the radius and the ulna. I would agree. There are similar structures in all the vertebrate animals for sure, and even I think maybe that's where it stops at the vertebrate animals. But all of the textbooks use this as evidence for evolution. And if you just again step back 5 feet and look at it, that is just as silly. It is evidence of a common designer. I think you notice nearly all of the cars on the road in Europe, and all the cars on the road in Asia, and the cars on the road in America, as a general rule, have 4 tires touching the ground. Well, that's proof they all evolved from butterflies. No, it's a design that works. It's a necessary design to have 4 tires touching the ground for stability and for ride comfort, etc. Why don't you have 20 tires touching the ground on your car? Well, because it's unnecessary. It wears out the rubber too fast, and too much friction with the road, etc. So I think a God who would design things would design each of the animals so that their forelimb can be rotated and twisted. To invent a machine that can do what the human arm can do would cost millions of dollars, maybe even could not be done, when you consider the human arm not only is able to do all these various motions, it is also able to heal itself. I don't know if anybody's made a machine can do that yet. If it gets an injury, it heals itself. All the machines I've ever had, I had to go fix them someplace, take it to a mechanic and get it fixed. So I agree there are similar structures. I don't think anybody's arguing that. The question is, what does it prove? In your mind, Stefan, and in the mind of evolutionists, this is evidence for evolution. Like this biology textbook says, other evidence for evolution. And then this is what you have. You've accumulated a whole bunch of bits of information that you think are evidence for evolution. Each one can be independently destroyed in a common sense argument, but somehow, because there's an accumulation of all these bits of false information, it looks like there's an overwhelming pattern of evolution. This essential biology book back from 2004 is homologous structures, anatomical signs of descent with modification. I would point out, first of all, why are they saying it has to modify through descent? We never see this. It's never observed. Cows produce cows, cats produce cats, humans produce humans, and they have the same bone structure without exception. I'd be willing to bet if we went back and dug up the grave of your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, he would have 2 bones in his wrist, just like you do. There has been no modification. You still have 2 bones in your wrist, and probably your great-great-great-great-grandchildren will have 2 bones in their wrist. Evolution is never observed. It is only imagined. It only takes place in the mind of those who want to believe this. We see 2 bones in the wrist of the humans, of every human being alive, if assuming they're born, other than some catastrophe or genetic defect. So Yes, I agree. We're looking at the same evidence, Stefan. We're both seeing the similar structures in these animals. I agree. Hold on. However, we're coming to very different conclusions. I would point out that thousands of parts on a Honda Civic will fit on a Honda Prelude. Thousands of parts, interchangeable parts. Well, that's design efficiency. Probably the lug nuts would interchange. Okay, that's proof they're coming from the same designer, not proof of evolution. This textbook says the commonality, or comparative anatomy here, provides further evidence of evolution. The commonality suggests that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. That's what the books are constantly teaching the kids, and obviously that's what you were taught going through school growing up, and you believed it. I think it's just common sense to say, look at this. First of all, this structure is amazingly complex. Each one of these bones, whether it be the tibia, the fibula, the patella, the radius, the ulna, the humerus, whatever, each bone is phenomenal. It's able to grow and function while it is changing size. It functions when you're a child, and it functions when you're an adult, and every stage in between. So you have all this bone structure that is able to work while it is changing. This is evidence of an amazingly intelligent designer. I look at the just one single bone in your arm and say, wow, thank you, God, you're so smart. The bone is both strong, slightly flexible, and lightweight. And the harder you work the muscles, the more the bone will grow in response to that. You have a bone that's able to sense a need for more density based on the more work you do. That's why a bodybuilder will not only get bigger muscles, but bigger bones. So we look at these bones in these animals, and I see amazing design. What a great God we serve. And you see a common ancestor, which ultimately goes back to dirt, which goes back to nothing. I don't understand how you can see that. This textbook says, commonality suggests that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. That is complete propaganda. That is silly. That is a lie. It could prove a common designer. All the bones, by the way, that from these different animals, whether they're for swimming or flying or digging or running or grasping, if you really get into the DNA analysis of this and the gene code, you'll find they develop from different genes in different organisms. I've never heard an evolutionist explain why the similar bones in a bat compared to a human, for instance, why is this bone developing based on the genetic code of very different genes? Okay, this Irish textbook shows comparative anatomy of the different animals. It says, look at that, we've all got fingers and wrist bones and arms. I agree. And that's used, it's used all over the world. I have textbooks from a lot of different countries. Here's one from Latvia showing the same thing. Here's one from just a few weeks ago. Someone sent me a 2015 textbook showing, again, the similar structures. And I don't argue with that. I agree. But what does it show? It proves a similar designer. Lug nuts from a Pontiac will fit on a Chevy. That's because they both evolved from a skateboard 4.792 million years ago. And you can go to the junkyard and dig up fossilized Chevys and find out the lug nuts probably still fit on a modern Chevy. That's not evolution. That's common design. So we both are observing similar forelimb structure. We're both observing the homology. It's a good observation. But to conclude they had a common ancestor is a bad conclusion. And to say this all helps prove we came from a rock for no reason with no help is a really bad conclusion. I could point out that I quickly wrote down a sentence. The sentence in English, please bring me a bat. I can change one letter. Please bring me a cat. I have completely changed the meaning. Please bring me a car, changing one more letter. We could play around and develop thousands of sequences like this where one tiny letter change in a very complex sentence can make a completely different meaning to it. Well, that's how all languages work. That's how your language would work there in Denmark. You can change one letter and have a vastly different meaning to the word. So changing one little gene on a chromosome might make some vast difference in the outcome of the creature, the animal, the anatomy. That, again, is evidence of intelligence. I don't understand how anybody can see anything other than intelligent design Why would they even dream? It shows we're related. And you mentioned, oh no, you didn't mention the development argument, but you mentioned evidence. Oh, I think we need to go back and define. You showed pictures of a wolf and a dog and the similar gene structure. Again, I would point out that's correct. They probably have similar genes because they have similar functions to serve in life. I think you would find Microsoft PowerPoint, which I use all the time, has probably millions of lines of code. Microsoft Word, to do documents and letters and writing, has also millions of lines of code. And if we laid them side by side, I think somebody with the time and energy and a government grant to do it could find many tens of thousands of identical lines of code. You could probably go through Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint and determine that they have a certain percentage of similarity. Let's say it's 95%, okay, to pick a number. Okay, I agree. What would that demonstrate, though? If you find similarities in Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, and I assure you you would find millions of identical lines of code, would that then prove that they're all related to Morse code and that they evolved by chance, or that it's a common design? When I click spell check in PowerPoint, it probably takes me to the exact same place that spell check in Microsoft Word takes me, or any other Microsoft program. So the fact that there are similarities is not evidence for evolution. And an honest science researcher should tell their students and anyone listening to them, hey, boys and girls, hey, men and women, we have similar structures between the wolf and the dog. I agree. There are 170 differences that we've discovered so far in the place settings of the genes. Okay, let's assume that's true. I would say I agree. Then an honest researcher would say, there are two possible ways to look at this: common ancestor or common designer. But the evolutionist is not being honest with their students. They're only telling them, you must look at this as evidence of a common ancestor, when it is not. It's evidence of a common designer. Let's see, I wanted to get to one more thing. You mentioned about, the wolf, the fox, the D-hole having a different 2,400 different positions. Again, they have similar functions to serve in life. They have two eyes on their head so they can have binocular vision. That is a common, hang on. It's very common for creatures to have, did I get it right, Steve? To go to the eye. I don't have my mouse here. I don't have, oh, you got it, okay. The whale, okay, the whale evolution right there, okay. Does it, brings me up to the right PowerPoint? No, I guess not, okay. We have moved it here, I'll get to it. The fact that there are similar needs, I think many cars, whether they're made the Lada in Russia or the Volvo or the Honda, they probably all have a spare tire and a jack, because they need that. Things go wrong, things break. And so they have similarities because of common problems they face in driving down the road. You're likely to get these same problems. And so if you watch my video number 4, Lies in the Textbooks, I go through all of this on different, explaining all the evolution evidences that are much better explained as a common, here we go. I want that one, 698, let's see, Alt-DV. 698, enter. Okay, now I need to go off screen, or is that okay like that? Hit escape. Okay, and then enter. There. Okay. You mentioned about the whales and the pelvic bones. Let me just explain to the listeners what this is about. This textbook shares what I would call the propaganda. Just imagine whales walking around. It's true. Here's the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History, has a skeleton of a whale, and it shows these bones you're referring to down here in the abdomen area. Here they are, another view inside that circle, and they call it the whale's pelvis, and say this is evidence that the whale used to walk on land. Wow, just imagine the whale walking on land with those little tiny bones. Actually, these bones are used in all whales that I'm aware of have something similar to this, and they're used in reproduction. The whale has to mate underwater in the dark with no arms, and he can't talk and say, scoot over, honey. They have a penis 15 feet long. They have to maneuver in the dark. So both male and female whales have ways of maneuvering their sex organs because they don't have any hands. Because this is a way to get baby whales. So if you want to believe that this is evidence that it used to have a leg, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not really science. That's a religious belief. All we see is whales, every time they're born and grow up, have the exact same bones. There is not, that's all they have. All the ancestor whales had this, and the modern whales have it. I'd be real cautious, though. I'd advise you, Stefan, to be cautious about using any fossils as evidence for anything. Because I've said many times, when you find fossils in the ground, like a fossil whale, really all you know is it died. You could not prove that that particular one had any children. You certainly couldn't prove it had different children. And why would anybody think bones in the dirt were capable of doing something that no whale today can do, which is produce something other than its kind? That's why evolution only takes place in the imagination. It doesn't happen in real life. We never see it. And science deals with things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Evolution is not science. It's completely religious. Here's National Geographic. It says millions of years ago, dolphins had legs, showing the same hind legs. They've got the picture right here. This is propaganda. This is a lie. Those bones in the dolphin are used exactly like the whale. They're used for reproduction. They're not leftover hind legs. Someone can believe that if they want. It says this textbook, this guy's very stupid about his whale anatomy. He said the whale's pelvis is located far from the vertebra and has no apparent function. He needs to go back. Whoever wrote that book needs to quit writing books on biology and go back to school. We've got one of the whale bones in our museum. That's one right there. It has a generous blood supply. It is a very active bone. I'm sure as active as the whale can get it. He'd love to use it more, probably. So it is part of their reproductive system. Has nothing whatsoever to do with walking on land. That is propaganda. But it's used all over the world. Here's one from just a few months ago. Still being used as evidence for evolution. Said it's evidence of evolution from four-legged land-dwelling mammals. A couple of thoughts I'd like to make, and then you can go on to your points here, Stefan. One, we don't see any animals produce anything other than their kind. We never see this. Two, these whale bones are used right now today, and they're always the same. Three, fossils do not prove anything. You can't prove it had any children. And, oh, I'm sorry, I had to cough here. Secondly, this example from the whale is a classic example. Even if it were true, it's an example of losing something, not gaining something. You're saying the animals lost their legs, and that is evidence of improvement? Show me an example of a creature that is gaining something. To go from legs to no legs is a loss of information. Now, it didn't happen. They didn't go from legs to no legs, but even if it were true, that again is the exact opposite of evolution. The bones in the whale are used. They have, like I said, a blood supply, nerve supply. They're used, and they used all the time. They are not evidence for evolution. Finding Ambulocetus or one of these creatures that are mostly imagination is evidence that something died. That's all it is. In a real honest court of law, it would never be used as evidence of anything. I'm sorry, of anything changing into a different kind of animal. So if you find fossils in the dirt, really all you can demonstrate is it died. It is not evidence of any evolution at all, unless you want to believe that. And I wish you evolutionists would be honest and say, students, this is what we believe. Capital B, believe. This is our religion. You need to start a church, the Church of the Evolutionist, and quit using tax dollars to spread this propaganda as if it is part of science. Like this one from Berkeley University, this couple months ago. Hippos likely evolved from a group of these creatures 15 million years ago. That's silly. Hippos are still producing hippos. Whales are still producing whales. You don't have any evidence for evolution. None. You can believe that if you want, but I'm sorry, it's not science. Okay. You left several. I didn't get time to cover several things. I'll get it during rebuttal here. Go ahead, Stefan, your turn.